Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to another video interview presented by the Keats-Shelley Association of America. The communications team at Keats-Shelley Association of America, and that is me, Anna Mercer, as Director of Communications, and also Mariam Wasif and Amy Wilcockson as our current Communications Fellows, are delighted to bring you more interviews with exciting creative writers, scholars, and curators working in Romanticism today. Today, Amy Wilcockson is presenting an interview with Jeff Cowton, who I'll introduce with a very short blurb also about Wordsworth Grasmere, his place of work. So Jeff, who is joining us today, is Curator and Head of Learning at Wordsworth Grasmere, a location in the Lake District in the north of England, on the edge of a beautiful little town called Grasmere. Jeff has worked in the museums world for 39 years, having begun his career as a volunteer with the Wordsworth Trust in 1981, before becoming a curator in 1994. In 2010, Jeff was awarded an MBE in recognition of services to museums. He is currently leading on the reinterpretation of the site and museum for the HLF-funded project, Reimagining Wordsworth. Now, the museum at Wordsworth Grasmere, if you haven't visited, tells the story of William Wordsworth's and indeed his family's radical and creative life through a collection of handwritten manuscripts, journals, letters, published poetry, and personal items. And it's very exciting to hear that the museum has just reopened last week in mid-May 2021 to welcome visitors again once more to the site. So that's something that hopefully indeed Jeff may be telling us about today, which is really exciting. So William Wordsworth, while he was living at Dove Cottage, which is a building part of the museum site in Grasmere, wrote many of his greatest poems. And of course, his sister Dorothy kept her fascinating Grasmere journal while living there too. The site and experience of Wordsworth Grasmere as a place tells the story of this remarkable period of, quote, plain living and high thinking. A bit about our interviewer, Amy, today, just before I hand over to her to start the questions. Amy Wilcockson is a PhD researcher at the University of Nottingham. She is editing the letters of the Scottish Romantic poet, Thomas Campbell. Amy has a strong interest in archives and has completed various placements in places such as Newstead Abbey, Lord Byron's home. Over to you, Amy and Jeff.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us today. I can't tell you how excited I am to get the chance to have a chat like this with you. So I wondered if I could start off. Oh, thank you. I just wondered if I could start off by asking if you could give us a little bit of an introduction to Wordsworth Grasmere and the different kind of places, artefacts, buildings that you look after under the Wordsworth Grasmere banner. And of course, why is it such a significant place, in your opinion?
Well, it's a place that many people listening, viewing will know well. Many people will have visited it, and they will have known it as Dove Cottage in the Wordsworth Museum, probably. And we changed its name to Wordsworth Grasmere to encompass the wider part of the valley, because as we know, the Wordsworth story in the Lake District and in Grasmere in particular is the valley. And we want very much to feel part of the valley rather than something just that bit separate. So the Wordsworth Trust owns the site, the Wordsworth Trust owns the collection, but the place, if you like, is Wordsworth Grasmere. So it's a sort of a subtle one that we're getting our heads around, but Wordsworth Grasmere, the place. And again, as many people watching will know, that its significance is that it was the first home created by William and Dorothy from scratch, if you like. Two people in their late 20s, William 29, Dorothy a year younger, coming, and really William dedicating his life to poetry, and Dorothy, of course, her time here spent very much writing the journals, the Grasmere journals, but also working, collaborating with William on the poetry and their life together. It's also here, of course, that William and Mary Hutchinson were married, and it's where 3 of their children were born. So it's a remarkably creative place that Wordsworth begins, if you like, this dedicated life in what he called his native mountains, and which created, amongst other things, of course, that first version of the prelude, the 1805 prelude that we know so well. So on the site, we have the collection. We have a collection that the poet's grandsons donated here in 1935. So immediately, as well as a place of activity, it becomes a place of research as well, and a place where you can see and experience the manuscripts written here about the place by these two very significant writers. So it's a kind of very special thing to be able to, you know, be in the research centre, have Dorothy's journal in front of you, to read the entry for that day and be able to actually compare with the weather and the world outside, just as Dorothy might have seen it, you know, 200 years ago. So it's a kind of remarkable place. I ought to mention too, of course, the tea shop. We have a very good tea shop. And I also ought to mention a very good bookshop too. So Wordsworth Grasmere encompasses all you would expect of a visitor attraction, but at the same time, you know, a great place of learning, of scholarship, of activity and creativity.
That sounds incredible. And yeah, the tea shop and the bookshop sound great as well. They're obviously a must visit.
They are essential.
Of course. I'm really intrigued by this next question, so I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. So I want to know a little bit more about your job. So what do you get up to as curator and head of learning at Wordsworth Grasmere, sort of day to day? Anna mentioned you started out as a volunteer, I think, and then now you're obviously curator. And also, what's the best thing about being curator and head of learning? I can imagine it's an amazing job.
It is a great job. It's like everybody else's job. It has its pressures. It has its excitement. It has its routineness. You know, deciding, for example, for the new museum, are we going to have unisex toilets or single-sex toilets, or you know, things like that. Those kind of really important things, but actually, you know, what you might not expect would be in my role. Interestingly, we went for unisex toilets, and we've had one review on TripAdvisor since we opened, and they said, love the guides, love the museum, love everything, strongly object to the unisex toilet. So there you go. These kind of decisions, they really matter to people. So we only got 4 stars out of 5 because of our unisex toilets. Anyway, so I do what you might expect me to do. I go to a lot of meetings. I lead a team of I think it's about 8 remarkable people who are all dedicated to looking after the collections, to developing knowledge, to sharing our knowledge. I work in the Jerwood Centre, which again, some people watching might know, which is a state-of-the-art research centre. It's got 70,000 objects in it, which we look after and care for and share. It's a place where researchers visit, but it's also a place where a lot of student groups come, a lot of school groups come, a lot of community groups come, because it's about sharing in a very careful way, in a very measured way, but it's about sharing the collection. So that's the essence of my job, is to work with the team to collect and develop, preserve, to manage the collection, but then to get the greatest public benefit from it, whilst having a mind to the future, because it's no good getting a lot of use out of it today if that essentially damages it for the future. So it's always with an eye to the past, the present, and the future. Now, a really nice example of what I do, for example, we're doing an exhibition on Dorothy Wordsworth, starting in October. It's, as everybody will know, 250th birthday of Dorothy Wordsworth, Christmas Day this year. And we're going to celebrate that with a year-long exhibition, which will change. And it's a very collaborative exhibition. And we're working with an artist, a man called Lee Hassel, who tells us that he has dyslexia. And he's working with a group of people in the southwest of the county, in Barrow-in-Furness, who is a blind society, visually impaired. Some people have no sight. And they're looking together at Dorothy's tour of Scotland. And they're looking at landscape from their own perspectives. And it'll be fascinating to see what people make of her writing. Now, that's good in itself, but this week Lee paid a visit to our collection centre, to where I am, and we looked at some notes that Dorothy made for her tour of Scotland. And they're tiny fragments, I don't know whether you can see, but they're about that big, and they're pencil written, and they're impossible to read. And when you look at them, they've got all 3 sides are straight, and the top side of the page is jagged. And then when you look at some of the other little pieces that we've survived, their jaggedness matches up like an old legal document, like an old indenture. And you can kind of work out how they might have been part of the same notebook and the notebook was stitched along the top, and somebody's taken a knife and simply cut the stitching off. But then you read that this little notebook is actually part of 36 leaves. It's got 36 leaves, and we've only got a few left. So then you start to think, well, why did Dorothy start at the beginning and the end and leave the middle and the bit empty? And so myself and this artist had this conversation. We thought, well, what a wonderful way of talking to the community group, the Blind Society, about the way William and Dorothy worked together, sharing notebooks. And we thought that for the new exhibition, we could create an art piece based on the fragments of this notebook, but with the Barrow Blind Society inputting towards it. So if you ask me what's a good bit of my job, that's a good bit of my job. Bringing the collections, the writing, and community groups and artists together to create something new and a new understanding. That was a very long answer, but I hope it kind of made sense and conveyed the breadth, of what's possible. It's about new creativity, new understandings, and new perceptions from the great writing.
Yeah, no, that sounds absolutely fascinating, and what an amazing thing to be able to sort of lead and work with people on. That sounds, it sounds incredible. Obviously, April 2020, I know we've mentioned Dorothy's 250th birthday. April 2020 was the 250th anniversary of the birth of William Wordsworth. And because of the pandemic, obviously, you had to close. So has the closure of Wordsworth Grasmere for a number of months, has that kind of affected any plans that you had for the reopening? Has the move to online, and I know you've had a number of new initiatives like the lecture and discussion series, Disparate Romantics, has that been a bit of kind of a saviour at this time, the online side of things? I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we were all geared up, weren't we, to open on the 7th of April on the birthday. And it just wasn't going to happen. What we had instead was an online celebration. And you might say, okay, well, you're missing 100, 200 people on site maybe that day. But we reached a far greater number of friends, people around the world through the online event. And so as Wordsworth might tell us in Tintin Abbey, this was more than abundant recompense, I should say. So that was a very nice celebration day. And since then, it's given us the opportunity to really test out things that we might do. So we've been able to test out with real visitors bit by bit how the site might operate, and so that when we did open last week, it felt just right. It really, everything was in place. It felt right. The opportunity to move into the virtual world has been a real blessing, because we've been able to do the webinars you mentioned, and that means, of course, you can have a person you're talking to from the other side of the world. So we've had speakers from Canada, for example. We've had audiences from all over the world. So each of those events, never done them before, we had getting on for 100 people event. Well, we could never get that number or that access, if we just did it in Grasmere. And then the other thing that's really worked has been the virtual tours of Dove Cottage. And again, one or two people watching might have seen some of these. And again, there's no substitute for the real thing, because you can't smell the space. You can't really get a sense of the size of it. You can't get a sense of the darkness to the lightness upstairs. But as students from Brigham Young University, we did a tour with, they said, isn't it just amazing all the same, to be in Utah and be inside Dove Cottage at the same time. And that's been a real, that I guess what it's done is it's forced us to move faster on these kind of things. So again, anybody watching who would like a virtual tour for their students or their university, please just get in touch. I should say too, when we talked about the highlights of my job, one of the real highlights is welcoming students into the reading room. And we do our short courses for a day or sometimes a week. And it's incredible to work with students with the manuscripts in the reading room. So we hope very much we can go back to that. So that's a real highlight of my job as well.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I've got a couple of manuscripts that I need to come and look at, I think, as well. So I might have to pop along up to Grasmere. Yeah, I will. The last time I visited actually was in September 2019, and Dove Cottage was completely bare, obviously. So I wondered if you could tell us more about the kind of the reinterpretation of the cottage. Now it's presumably filled again, and the 6.5 million reimagining of Wordsworth Grasmere.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I mean, I ought to have said that you mentioned the lottery fund, and we've been very grateful to them, and also to the Arts Council England for support, not just for the capital project, but to keep us going, you know, over these few months, well, I guess a year or so, without a regular income. When you visited Dove Cottage in September 19, I suspect by that point the roof had just been taken off and repaired. The floors had been lifted and put back. The new security, lighting, air conditioning, the environmental control systems were all back in place, and it was just waiting for the interpretation to go back in at that point. So you will have seen it, like very few people have seen it, you know, kind of empty, and you know that's an experience in its own right. Now, since then, we have introduced more stuff into it, and it's a question of, you know, well, how much is enough? And what we decided to do was not to pick a frozen moment in time. So, you know, you can't say, well, this is the 5th of April, 1802, because at that point you would miss out the whole time of William being married, as it were. You would miss out as a family home. And then if you did it in 1806, well, you'd miss that special time when William and Dorothy and John were together, say in 1800. So the way we've approached it is to introduce a number of stories. So we're always, where we can, we take our lead from Wordsworth. And in his poem, Simon Lee, the Old Huntsman, where he says, you know, famously, you know, there is a tale in everything. What we've done is to introduce lots of things into the house, each of which tells a story, and which taken together will give the visitor that sense of a home over those 8 years. So we have, for example, the story where William has his haircut. Dorothy says, you know, William is below having his hair cut, reading The Leech Gatherer to the man cutting his hair. Well, downstairs we have a pair of scissors and a manuscript, a facsimile manuscript of The Leech Gatherer. So that our hosts, if you like, we're reluctant to call them guides because it's not a guided tour, but the host, if you like, will introduce these stories. And we hope that through conversation, the visitor will get a sense of a home. And that's the whole point. It's a home in which these people lived. They lived lives like ourselves, but they did remarkable things, perhaps a bit more special than many of us can kind of achieve. And we felt that we didn't want a guided tour. We wanted people to have an introduction to the house so that when they left the film, it was like they were stepping into the stage set, if that makes sense. So you see in character William, Dorothy, Mary, the children, the Reverend Simpson, he gets a mention, the Leech Gatherers in the film. And you see the film and you feel like you're in amongst it. And then it's like, what, 10 yards between the film and the house. And we showed it to a family, and when the children went in, they said, but where are the people? You know, where is William and Dorothy? They'd seen them in the film. Well, why aren't they in the house? So it's that kind of sense of realism, you know. So in the film, we quote the line where Dorothy says, you know, few people who haven't experienced a house full of children, and then the silence that follows when they've gone to bed. You know, you could write that today, you know, that sense of the mad half hour that children go through, and then it's silence. And so on the one hand, we're trying to create a very human experience, a very human story, but then always remembering that remarkable things happened in that house. And it's only because of the remarkable things that we're actually visiting today. So that's our thought. It's that you feel at home in the house, you get a sense of the words. The words are everywhere. The words are on facsimile manuscripts, they're in the film. The museum's full of words. You can't escape William and Dorothy's words, but we want it to be a place where your imagination has space to grow. You know, that's isn't it the essence of romanticism? It's the human imagination. Well, see the film, have your imagination stirred, bring with you a heart that watches and receives, as Wordsworth would tell us to do, and be in the house and imagine real people. And then just to say too, that's a step back in time. That's a suspension of disbelief if you can do it. But then you go to the museum and you're brought bang up to date and think, well, why does it matter? Okay, that was a very interesting and very enjoyable history lesson. But does it really matter? You know, what does it matter? What does this speak to me? So the museum is proudly modern. And there you see the manuscripts. There you hear testimonies of people to whom the poetry has spoken. So you hear someone talking about, for example, well, there's a nice example. Many people watching this will know the name Pamela Woof, the editor of Dorothy's journals, and much, much more. Well, she speaks about the ode, and Pamela won't mind me saying that she's 90 this year, and she speaks about how that poem speaks to her and how her interpretation of it has changed, her feeling towards it has changed over a lifetime. You know, so it's like they're not just abstract works of art, they speak to us. And there's 14 audio visuals like that where you can hear people talking. And again, names that people watching will know, you know, Fiona Stafford and Lucy Newlin and Stephen Gill and Simon Bainbridge and Sally Bushell. But then most of the names are people you've never heard of, but they're just, if you like, ordinary people like, you know, dare I say it, you and me, and, you know, speaking about how these poems speak to them. So it's the step back in time, and then it's like, okay, it really matters even 200 years on.
Yeah.
So that's what we're trying to do. And the best outcome for us is people go to the shop and they buy a book of poems. And then 5 years down the line, they remember a line they heard here and they look it up and it spoke to them, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
What's it in the Solitary Reaper? How does that end? Something like, you know, the music in my heart I bore. That's good. The music in my heart I bore long after it was heard no more. That's great. Keep waving it, Amy. Keep waving.
I will. I'll keep promoting the Wordsworth poems. Yeah. No, that sounds amazing. You must be so excited as well at the moment, obviously, that the museum's open now and obviously visitors are back. It must be so exciting to have people.
It's really nice, and the nicest part is because, you know, in museums they can I don't think I'm giving anything away, certainly not in our museum, but in a lot of museums there's a disconnect between, if you like, the curatorial and learning staff and the front of house staff. And what's really nice here is that the front of house staff are involved in the interpretation. So it's not just that they sell tickets, as it were. I mean, that's important in itself, but they actually do some of the interpretation. So it's a joined up kind of thing. And I just love it when they come to me and they say, well, Jeff, this morning this visitor left and they told me this. And the best one a couple of days ago was one of our staff came to me and said, there was a visitor in the museum this morning and they came to me and they said, you know, I think I'm going to have to rethink Wordsworth. And we thought, that's it. That's what we want. Rethink Wordsworth, reimagine Wordsworth. That was a good day. Isn't it?
Just what you want.
Yeah.
to impart.
Just what we want.
Yeah, exactly. I also wondered as well, you've mentioned this quite a lot actually, but obviously when we think of Wordsworth, we do tend to think of William. But have you got a lot of the stories of the women of Grasmere in the new museum in Dove Cottage as well?
We do. I mentioned I can't think of a better way of putting it, but there is a film that introduces you to the lives, to the house and the valley and the poetry. And thinking about it, I don't think there's a scene in that film where William isn't either with Dorothy or with Mary. You know, they are now so integral to the story, to the interpretation. And there's always been a tendency, because we focus so much on Dorothy's writing, Dorothy's journals, that the family, Mary and the children, because obviously they don't feature, the journal comes before that marriage, that we tend to think, well, that's the 8 years, you know, William and Dorothy and the journal. Well, in fact, it's only 3 years. And so we've really tried to introduce this as a family home, and of which Mary's part is every bit as important as it ought to be. So in the cottage, their writing is everywhere, their possessions are everywhere, there's lots of women's clothing around the place. You know, it looks like a proper, you know, balanced, if you like, you know, family home. And then in the museum, we've got 6-star objects. So there might be 100 things, but there are 6-star objects, and 3 of them are Dorothy's journals. You know, so Dorothy very much so. And Polly Atkin and Pamela Woof, we have 3, I mentioned lots of films, but there's 3 major films in the museum. And one of the 3 is on Dorothy, and Pamela and Polly give a wonderful account of what Dorothy means to them, you know, what her life and her writings and why they take so much from her. And in one of the galleries too, we tell the story of the writing of the prelude. Well, the writing of the prelude, as we know, that couldn't have happened without Mary and Dorothy in particular, and Dora course, writing the 1839 copy of the poem. So there's a wonderful spot at the end of one gallery where we got the 1805 prelude, and then to the left of it is a drawing of Coleridge from 1804. Next to it is a drawing of Dorothy, a silhouette, 1806, and then a drawing of William, 1806. So those three together, next to the prelude. And then in the case just to the right is a picture of William and Mary together from the 1832 prelude that was copied out. So a visitor cannot but leave without recognizing the place and the role and the importance of the women as part of the story and in Wordsworth's life.
Yeah, that's not that. It all sounds amazing. I'm going to have to just head on up.
You're going to have to come.
I'm going to have to come.
You're going to have to come tomorrow. I can see.
You're selling it to me. I'm going to be on the next train up. I know you did mention earlier a little bit about kind of working with the community, and we know that Wordsworth Grasmere is very involved in that, and obviously your role as head of learning is integral to that as well. So what else are you currently doing to kind of bring the Wordsworth's poetry and creativity to local schools, charities and other groups?
I think that this element of our work has probably been the cottage looks different, the museum obviously brand new, but this element of collaboration, it's sometimes called co-curation, isn't it? But I think I prefer the word collaboration, has been absolutely transformative in recent years, but certainly in the last couple of years. If I think about schools work, there's a project we're doing at the moment because, as you may know, the Wordsworth built themselves a moss hut in their garden of moss and hurdles, and a place where they would sit and reflect and share space and share conversation. Well, a couple of artists made a new interpretation of it, and we've sent out a challenge to schools. Well, you make a moss hut. It's very simple, really. You just need a shelter. It needs to be made out of materials close to hand. It needs to be able to hold 2 or 3 people, and it would be nice if it had a view. Well, so we've sent out a competition to schools to make your own. We've sent the same challenge to community groups. You may know this thing, Men in Sheds. Well, we think, well, okay, that's a moss hut by another name. Create your own moss hut. A place to reflect, a place to think, a place to be still, tell us about your own moss hut. So that's kind of good, really. We also, we've developed a woodland on site. So we've got forest school activities. So again, children, students coming from round and about can come to site and enjoy the site. Or at the other end of the spectrum, Wordsworth's Dudden sonnets, these 33 sonnets about the river that's just to the southwest of us, they were published in 1820. We wanted to celebrate that in 2020. Well, of course, we're just a bit late. But there was a group of textile workers, crafts people, people who make beautiful, beautiful textiles and embroideries and knitting. And they got in touch and they said, we would like to do a textile illustration for every one of those sonnets. So there's 8 of them in the group. So they've each done about 4 of these A4 sonnets. And then they said, wouldn't it be good actually if we did an embroidery and a textile work for the whole river? So the 8 women have produced in 2-meter lengths an embroidery of the River Dudden. And that's going to circle our exhibition room. And that's just one of the many collaborators in that exhibition on the Dudden sonnets. And the great thing about that was that they'd never read the poems before. So it brings people into the poetry, and by them illustrating the sonnets, it will bring our audiences into the poetry in the same way, So there's wonderful, if people know the poems, there's wonderful illustrations of stepping stones, of sheep washing, of the church, it really is something else. And then the last example I would give, because that's very much Cumbria, if you like, is literally before this conversation, I was in conversation with the Children's Society in Leeds, and they work with refugees, local young people who from Africa, from Middle East. And at the end of June, there's going to be a dozen of them come over to Grasmere, spend 2 nights in Grasmere, courtesy of the Quaker Guest House in Grasmere. We're going to work with students from the University of Cumbria, Penny Bradshaw's students, and we're also going to work with an artist who will walk in the footsteps of Dorothy Wordsworth, and over the course of the weekend create new artwork about the young people's responses to Dorothy in a landscape they've never been to before. And that will form part of the Dorothy Wordsworth exhibition starting in October. So that's the kind of work that we do. And I just simply can't wait. I think that's going to be an amazing weekend. It's the 3rd time we've worked with refugees from West Yorkshire. And they just, you know, people talk about the benefits of diversity. Well, we know, don't we? It's just wonderful when it comes together like this. So yeah, watch this space again. You'll have to come twice, Amy, not tomorrow and in about 6 months' time.
I'll just have to move to Grasmere. That's the only thing for it.
I would do that.
It sounds so varied as well, the stuff you're doing, like obviously with the refugees, with different community groups, with schools. I think it sounds like Wordsworth Grasmere could teach a lot of other museums and other literary house museums in particular. Well, you know,
I mean, we all learn from each other, don't we? And obviously a lot of the ideas that I've talked about today have come on my travels, you know, so it all kind of works together. In the new museum, there's a room dedicated simply to sit and listen to the poem. So they're on an hour-long loop. So you can sit there for an hour and hear people like Ian McKellen or Simon Armitage or Jackie Kay reading Wordsworth. But at the same time, you will then hear one of our Dove Cottage young poets. What will she be? A 19, 20-year-old woman living in Kendal, who I think, don't broadcast this, but I think reads Wordsworth every bit as good as the, you know, the professional does. I love her reading. So that idea came from when I visited the Yeats exhibition in Dublin a few years ago, and you sat in a kind of a circle and you heard Yeats's poetry read beautifully. So we all learn from each other, but I do of course hope that people will learn from us as well. You know, so it goes, doesn't it? So it goes.
Yeah, no, it all sounds incredible, and you've spoken a lot about this, but I was just going to end with sort of asking what's next for Wordsworth Grasmere in the coming years. You've spoken about the Dorothy exhibition, but can you give us any sort of glimpses into the future, any upcoming exhibitions over the next few years or anything like that?
Well, these birthdays all come round together, don't they? So it's Coleridge. It was 1772, so it's got to be his turn quite soon. The British Library have very kindly offered to lend us their manuscript of I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. And we hope that in the Dorothy exhibition, to put that manuscript next to Dorothy's journal, you know, where she, of course, describes the daffodils at Ullswater. So to see those two, those shared language, those shared experiences in the same cabinet, that would be very special. I think that the trust, to my mind, has got two major challenges thinking of the future. One is to generate an income, because without an income, we're nowhere. We can't do anything. So an income that's generated from values-driven commercialization, if you like, from giving value as well as values driven, if you see what I mean. So I think resilience, I think that's part of my job too. We all have a part to play in that side of things. But I think the other great thing is the diversity, and we talk about it a lot. And to genuinely make that transformation there, I think is the next thing. And if we're drawn towards a close, I would just say to people watching, listening, if you would like to help us make that change, I would love to hear from you. I really would, in all forms of diversity. We do live in a village in the middle of the Lake District. It's very much a single ethnicity where we are, and that, as we know, is one form of diversity we need to make a change to. So anybody who's watching who would like to help us diversify, help us to internationalize, help us to generate income by maybe bringing students to Grasmere, you know, that all helps. So if I may put out a plea and an invitation, we only get where we are by working with people like those who are watching and listening, to this. So thanks for that opportunity, Amy.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. Where is best to find out more about Wordsworth Grasmere? Is that the website or the social media? Yeah.
I guess any of those, isn't it? Yeah. Any of those would be grand. Yeah.
Brilliant. And I think we'll put some links to that underneath, to the social media and website underneath this video when we post it, so everybody will be able to find them really easily. So yeah, well, thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us today. I can't tell you how much fun I've had talking to you today and hearing all about all the great things that you're doing. And that's it, I'm gonna have to go book my train now to head off.
You're gonna have to. And we'll go to that cafe when we have our coffee in the cafe. Yeah.
Yep.
When you drink your coffee and the froth goes down, because cappuccinos have reached Grasmere, you'll be pleased to know. When the coffee goes down, the words of Wordsworth appear on the inside of the cup, and there's perfect. A variety of lines that come. And so it's lovely sitting in our cafe and hearing people on the next table reading lines of Wordsworth to each other. That's a joy.
That's perfect.
Just yeah. Sorry, I sound too keen, don't I? I'm sorry.
No, you don't.
Anyway.
No, you should be keen. You should be so excited, and as should everybody watching, to hear about all the amazing things going on. But yes, thank you very much, Jeff, and I'll hand back over to
It's my pleasure.
Anna now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, so much for talking to us, and thank you, Amy, for conducting a really, really fascinating interview. It was lovely to hear that Jeff is obviously, keen for people to get in touch, to get involved and collaborate with the museum. I'm really excited personally for some Coleridge family stuff. That's great. That's exciting for me, coming up in future years. And I just wanted to say, just to close, I really like what you said, Jeff, about the Wordsworths sharing their notebooks, and how now the museum and the communities around the museum are sharing new perceptions of those notebooks and that poetry, and just how everything that came out of your conversation between you just kind of fostered that idea that it's all about creativity being fostered by people working together, and how important that interaction is. And I just thought that was a big takeaway from what I just heard from you two talking, and that was really inspiring. So thank you. I hope to visit soon as well and get back into the Jerwood Centre and look at some manuscripts. So thank you so much, Jeff and Amy. And yes, we will share some links to Wordsworth Grasmere and all the great work they're doing.